It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the Gigabyte AORUS AD27QD. The OSD is controlled by a little joystick on the underside of the bottom bezel. There's also a power LED just above that, and that glows a gentle blue when the monitor is on. It's really more of a cool white than a blue, and if the monitor enters a low power state, so it loses signal to the computer, that will glow amber instead. Before moving on to the main menu system and the OSD controls themselves, I'm actually going to look at the lighting feature, the RGB lighting feature, and that's controlled by RGB Fusion 2.0 software. Well, that's the current version anyway, and you need to have the USB cable connected to the monitor to actually control the lighting feature, or customize the lighting feature I should say. The lighting feature on this model, it's not like a bias light. It doesn't give a kind of glow around the monitor. So for my uses, I don't really like this feature particularly because it doesn't have any utility. But if you can see the back of your monitor, or other people can see the back of your monitor, then you can show it off with cool colors and stuff like that. But to use this, you go into the settings menu, so the main menu system, and I'll go through all of this shortly, but it's in the system section of the menu. RGB LED. Mode 1, Mode 2 and Mode 3 are presets. So I'll show you where the lights are located. I've set it to Mode 1 at the moment. So you can see there's really not any noticeable glow around the monitor. Very, very, very faint one. Doesn't really do anything from the front. But you can see that there's a sort of wing here. There's a kind of orange colour. There's also a little mark there. And there is an AORUS Falcon at the rear as well. And there's the same on the other side. I'll just try and show you that AORUS Falcon a bit better, just if I can maneuver the camera a bit better. So that's with Mode 1. Mode 2, quite different. That cycles various different colours. A nice sort of pretty rainbow effect really. It does the same on the little Falcon logo as well, although you can't really see that clearly. So it just cycles various different shades. Mode 3. This is again a kind of rainbow effect, but it cycles more slowly. It's a little bit different. But I'm now going to open the RGB Fusion 2.0 software so I can show you how you actually control these lights using the software. I'm not going to spend too long going through this because I know it's very tedious for some people who actually want to see the proper OSD rather than just this particular feature. So when you're on the software, when you're first on the software, it can be a bit confusing. You just see some weird overlapped text and you can't seem to click on anything. You have to click on one of the zones first that you want to be controlling. So you can customize the colors of each of these different zones. So there are various different patterns, static, and lots of different animated patterns, depending on what you want to do. Colour cycle's a nice one, that's the sort of rainbow effect. So you can have them colour cycling, and you can have the central logo sort of colour of your preference. Or you can have them doing various different animations, but if you just wanted to have each zone a slightly different colour, you can do that. So you can't change the right and left side, but you can change the right and left versus the central region. So let's have a nice bright green there and pink on the outside. So you can see that there. And actually the central region also includes the little wings there. It's not just the Falcon logo that's green. So that's really all I'm going to go through for that. It's a decent amount of flexibility. You can change the brightness as well, and the speed. If you've got one of the flashing patterns, you can change the speed at which it does it. But it doesn't have much utility, as I say, because it's not like a bias light. It's just something which you can admire from the rear of the monitor. So if you twiddle the joystick left, you can adjust the volume of anything connected to the 3.5mm headphone jack. If you twiddle the joystick right, you can quickly change the input used by the monitor. Twiddle it up and you can change the black equalizer setting, and I'll come on to that when I'm actually in the main menu system instead. Twiddle it down and you can change the picture modes. So there are various different picture mode settings. Custom 1, Custom 2 and Custom 3 are very similar to the standard mode, which is the factory default, but they allow you to have 3 separate profiles. You can't change absolutely everything. I'll come on to this shortly. You can't sort of save absolutely everything to this, but there's a separate aspect of the OSD that you can actually save settings to, which is different to the Custom 1, Custom 2 and Custom 3. I think you can actually change anything with Custom 1, Custom 2 and Custom 3 except for the color channels. When you adjust them, it's applied universally, and I will come on to this shortly. But it gives you a nice amount of flexibility, and it's very easy to just change between Custom 1, Custom 2, Custom 3. So you just have to twiddle the joystick down and you can get these. And I use Custom 1 as my test settings, Custom 2 as a low blue light setting for my relaxing evening viewing, just for my own viewing pleasure, not specifically for testing the monitor. So I like that little feature, very easy to access. If you press the joystick in, you get this little radial menu, and there are various different features there. Power off, quite self-explanatory. There's a game assist, dashboard and setting. So dashboard, this puts various different little labels onto the screen if you enable it, and you can actually select what it's showing you, various different things. Just note that you need the USB cable connected, so you can see that just towards the top right of the screen there. Or you can change where on the screen it's displayed if you prefer, but you actually need the OSD Sidekick software to be running for this to populate. And you therefore need the USB cable connected to the monitor. So you can now see it showing you CPU temperature, frequency. It doesn't show everything. Fan speed not available because my fan doesn't support that particular thing. Various other aspects. And if you've got an AORUS mouse, it can show you the DPI, the sensitivity, which is currently being used for that as well. So as I mentioned, you can change the location of the dashboard feature as well. You can have it top left, top right, bottom left or bottom right, depending on your preference. Game Assist, this has various different little on-screen features. So it says AORUS Info, various different little things you can have here. Info location, I'm going to change that so you can actually see it in the video. That would be very helpful. There we go. So this is a timer, and that's counting up. So that just gives you an indication of the time that's elapsed since you activated the feature. You can have it count down if you prefer. And you can have various different settings or different game assist aspects on the screen at the same time. Gaming counter, I'm going to admit I actually have no idea how this works. I sort of had to play around with it. I didn't see anything obvious in the manual suggesting how this works or in the OSD Sidekick. I thought it was supposed to be that you assign a certain button and every time you press that button it sort of counts up, but I couldn't see how you actually do this. I didn't seem to respond to any clicks of the mouse or anything like that. So I'm not entirely sure what utility this has or how you use it. Refresh rate is something which is useful, and it's useful in the sense that it lets you know that adaptive sync is enabled and doing its thing. So it's at a static 144 Hz at the moment. Now in a game, Battlefield 5, and you can see that this is fluctuating as my frame rate changes. But you can also see that it changes so quickly it's actually very difficult to read what it's actually showing, which is not great. It was similar on the Dell S2719 DGF, which I reviewed not long ago. It sort of was just so quick that you can't really see what it's showing. You can see roughly that it's quite a high frame rate, but it sort of momentarily dips closer to 100 frames a second, or it appears to in the counter. But I mean, no human is actually able to read exactly what it's showing there. But it does at least show that adaptive sync is working and doing its thing. If you have the technology disabled, then that will just show the refresh rate that you've got your monitor set at. So static 144 Hz, for example. Next, there's a crosshair feature. And this is quite interesting because the style one, and that's just your standard crosshair. So I'll just show you that first of all. A little green crosshair in the middle of the screen. Just going to change the desktop background so it's a bit clearer. You can see it there. Just a simple crosshair design. But the Custom 1, Custom 2 and Custom 3, you can actually customize them in the OSD Sidekick software. I'm not going to spend time going through the ins and outs of this software. It just basically is an alternative method of controlling the OSD. and you can leverage some of the features like the crosshair customization feature by running the software. You need the USB 3 upstream cable connected to use the software. So you can see there it says crosshair, has 3 different designs there, so custom 1, custom 2 and custom 3. You can just see them in the middle there. And these are just little designs I've made, so that's PCM, little smiley face and just a simple dot. If you wanted to draw your own, you can use this tool here. You can change the colour as well. It doesn't have to be green, it could be red or blue or teal, whatever you want. It's only a simple sort of drawing with the mouse style system, so it's not really the easiest to use, but it does work. And then you just press save and it uploads it to the monitor, and that'll be saved as one of your custom crosshairs. There's also a crosshair pack if you prefer to use some nicer designs which Gigabyte have made for you. So there's my weird little PCM crosshair in the middle there now. The final game assist feature is display alignment. And this just allows you to line up multiple displays. It gives you various different markings around the display so you can line things up properly in a multi-display setup. So the only 2 remaining options on the little radial menu, power off and setting. Power off is pretty self-explanatory as I've said, but if you prefer you can just hold the power button for a little bit and that will turn the monitor off. So you don't have to go into the menu and press power off, you can just hold the joystick if you prefer. Setting gets you onto the main menu system. As you can see, it's a rather comprehensive OSD system, so I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can, but still being quite thorough. Orange and black, sort of slightly Halloweenish scheme going on there with the colours there. You can't change that, but it's okay, does the trick. There is various information at the top there, and that just summarises what you're changing in the current bit of the menu you're at. So I'm at the gaming section at the moment, or I was before it disappeared on me. There's aim stabilizer, which is grayed out, and I'll come on to that shortly, but first of all, black equalizer. This is very similar to BenQ's setting by the same name. If you increase this, it increases the visibility in dark areas, and it's actually a bit different to BenQ's implementation, because if you increase this even slightly, it increases the black depth and therefore decreases the contrast, so even if pure black is getting lighter than it should. Ideally, this would actually only work on shades which are lighter than black but still quite dark, because that's really what it's intended to do. And you can see things eventually look completely flooded and washed out. So not the best implementation, I have to say, of this type of feature. And if you decrease that, then your gamma is essentially going to crazy high levels and it messes things up, makes things look very cinematic but blend in far too readily in dark areas. So 10's the neutral position. And what you see on the camera and the video is not really representative of how these blocks look in real life, but it does at least give you an impression of the sort of relative effect that this setting has. Next, the super resolution, and this is a sharpness filter, a sharpness increase if you prefer. So you can set that between 1 and 4, with 4 being the strongest over sharpening effect. And I find that even at 1, things are over sharp. I mean, this monitor has a fairly neutral sharpness out of the box, so there's really no need to do this. There's also a separate sharpness control if you want more granular control over sharpness. But I would say if you are running a non-native resolution, then you may prefer the sharper look that this gives, or indeed increased sharpness with the sharpness control gives. Display mode, various different settings there, full aspect 1:1. So if you are running a non-native resolution, which I'll just do quickly. So I've now got it running at the full HD resolution, and you can see full and aspect do exactly the same thing. That's because all aspect does is it maintains the aspect ratio of the source resolution you have selected, which in this case is 16:9 anyway, the same as the native resolution. So full and aspect do the same thing. They use all of the pixels of the monitor, use an interpolation process. The remaining options are grayed out, and I think that's probably because I've got FreeSync active. So I'm just going to disable FreeSync. And as you can see, there's this FreeSync setting on or off, but if you disable FreeSync, then you should be able to access the other settings, I believe. Yeah, so now you can see there's also a 1:1 setting, and that puts a large black border around the image and only uses the pixels called for in the source resolution. So there's no geometric distortion, no softening, anything like that. It just looks like proper native full HD, but on a small screen. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how large that is. I think it's about 21, 22 inches or something like that. The remaining settings are basically emulation modes. So it will emulate a 22-inch wide 16:10 screen, 23-inch wide 16:9 screen, 23.6-inch 16:9 screen, or 24-inch 16:9 screen. Next there's overdrive, and you can set that to picture quality, balance or speed, and that is explored in the review. Aim stabilizer, you have to have FreeSync disabled. You also have to be running the native resolution to use this feature, and you need to have the refresh rate set to 100 Hz or 144 Hz from the listed resolutions. This is a strobe backlight feature, so you'll be able to see flickering on the video, and that's because the monitor is strobing its backlight at a frequency matching the refresh rate of the display, and this is all explored in the written review. Next there's picture. Various different settings there, so they're the presets, and I'll just go through these quickly. I know I mentioned the custom ones before, and they're similar to the standard, but they allow you to customize various things. There's also AORUS, which really just bleaches the image and looks terrible. FPS, which oversaturates the image and bleaches it and looks awful. RTS/RPG, which has an over sharpness filter, also oversaturates the image. Movie, which is alright, I suppose, but a little bit oversaturated and not quite balanced very well. But all these do is they just change various different settings which you can change manually. The reader mode, so this is essentially a low blue light setting. sRGB, this is an sRGB emulation setting. Again, it has good utility, but you can also see that lots of the settings are grayed out. You can't adjust things like brightness or the color channels, things like that. So it's not ideal, but it is an sRGB emulation mode which restricts the color gamut, and that is explored in the review. And then there are your custom presets that allows full flexibility. You can adjust the brightness, the contrast, color vibrance, and this is a digital saturation enhancement feature, and increasing that will pull shades close to the edge of the color gamut without expanding the color gamut itself, so you lose shade variety. Things look more saturated but less natural. And some users might kind of like this look, but it's really redundant on this monitor anyway because it has such a generous color gamut, and that gives you high levels of saturation without messing up the shade variety. Oh, you can decrease this further if you like a less saturated look. If you change this to 9, it actually sort of washes some areas of the image out quite clearly, and that's just a reduction of 1 from 10 to 9. But further, it'll eventually go completely monochrome. Sharpness allows you to adjust the sharpness of the monitor, 5 being neutral, 0 being very soft, 6 being over sharp, up to 10. I find 5 to be just fine, and that's the default sharpness setting. Various gamma settings explored in the review. Off gamma 1, gamma 2, gamma 3, gamma 4 and gamma 5. Color temperature, you can set that to user define and manually adjust the red, green and blue color channels. You can have that set to warm, which is another low blue light setting, which I actually quite like, at appropriate times of the evening, I should say. There's normal, and that's just the factory default. So there's cool, which gives a cool cast to the image, an overly blue appearance overall, and the color temperature, which is too high for normal use. Low blue light, and this is a low blue light setting, as the name implies, and it has an increased effect if you increase that up to 10 being the strongest. It also has a bit of a green cast to the image, and this is explored in the written review, and for that reason I actually prefer to use the warm colour setting, and I also reduce the brightness for my own viewing comfort in the evenings, and that doesn't have the same green cast to the image that this does. But the reason this has a green cast is because it doesn't reduce the green colour channels and therefore maintains strong contrast. If you reduce the green colour channel, as you get with the warm setting, then it does have a knock-on implication to the contrast. There's a dynamic contrast setting, which is also explored in the review. You can set that to various different values. Increasing this increases the gamma quite significantly, as well as activating the dynamic contrast setting. Sensei demo, this is peculiar to me. I don't know why they've called it Sensei demo, because Sensei is actually a BenQ feature. I don't know if they've licensed this from BenQ, but whatever, it just shows half of the screen with your whatever preset you've got selected and the other half with your factory defaults. So I don't know what this does, to be honest. I've used various different presets now, and it all looks exactly the same on the left and right side of the screen. The left and right side changes at the same time. So I don't know what exactly this is. I know what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't seem to be doing it. Then there's an option to reset the picture menu to the factory defaults. Next there's display, and you can change the input used by the monitor, the RGB HDMI PC range. So this is either limited or full range or limited, or you can have it automatically select for you. And this is if you've got HDMI connected and this is relevant. I'm using DisplayPort at the moment, it's not relevant. And if you're a PC user, then you want to use a full range signal most of the time. And if you leave it on auto detect, it will use a full range signal, or it will use an appropriate signal based on what you've got set in the graphics driver. If you're using a games console, you might want to experiment with different settings there. But again, if you have it auto detect, it should change for you depending on what you've got your system set to. There's overscan, and this will cause the image to sort of flow off the screen a bit. And this is designed for, you can see it more up there. You can see my desktop icons now go off the screen. And this is really just for older systems. It's a legacy feature, not really relevant for modern PCs or modern games consoles. PIP, P by P. So there's picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture settings. I've only got one source selected. I've only got one source connected at the moment, but I'll briefly show you what this does. So I've got PIP, picture-in-picture, so you can have one source up there and the other source displaying for the rest of the screen. There are various different options as well associated with this. So you can change the source used there versus there and swap them around if you prefer. You can change the size, so it's large at the moment. You can have it medium, which is considerably smaller, or small, which is smaller again. You can change the location that the little box there is displayed, so where your secondary source is displayed on the screen. Left top, left bottom, right bottom. And that will just quickly switch the sources. Audio switch will switch the audio source used, so you can select whether it's using HDMI port 1, HDMI port 2, DisplayPort, or USB for the audio. And there is P by P, picture by picture, and this will show two sources. And you can see it doesn't fill the whole screen. You'd have to create a custom resolution of a particular value. I can't think of what it would be off the top of my head for that to fill the whole screen. But it doesn't want to distort things, which is why you've just got a little section of the screen filled up there. And you'd have the same there if you had another source. There are a few different settings associated with this as well. And again, you can change the size of it. So if you've got full selected, that will actually just stretch the image and look completely distorted depending on the resolution you've got selected. Or aspect, which will maintain the aspect ratio and not distort things. And display switch, which will just switch the sources around for you. And audio switch, again, the same as with the PIP. Next, there's system. This allows you to adjust various other settings. Language that the OSD is displayed in. The RGB LED feature, which I've gone through already. I didn't even realise I'd left that on mode 3, to be honest, because it really doesn't glow much at all when you're in front of the monitor. Headphone, so you can adjust the volume of anything connected to the 3.5mm headphone jack, or just mute that. You can change the audio source, much as I'd shown you in the PIP P by P section, but just for your main usual input. OSD setting, you can change the idle timeout period, so that's how long after the last button press before the OSD automatically disappears, or you can just exit as it says there by just twiddling the joystick left a couple of times. You can exit manually by doing that. OSD transparency, you can change the level of transparency used with the OSD, so you can have it pretty much invisible, or you can have it nice and opaque, just whatever you prefer. OSD lock, and that just makes it more difficult to mess around with settings, which is good if you've got younger or potentially just annoying family members who can't work out how to unlock the monitor. You can stop them fiddling around with your settings, which is very useful. Next is quick switch. This allows you to change what the function of the joystick does when you just twiddle it up, left, right or down without actually entering the main menu or without clicking the joystick at all. So you might, for example, want it to be set to low blue light when you twiddle it up. Down, you might want it, picture mode's fair enough. Right, you might want it to be set to adjust your brightness, for example. And now I've changed what it does when you twiddle the joystick up or to the right. So if you twiddle it up, you can see you can change the low blue light easily, or if you twiddle it to the right, you can change the brightness easily. Next, there's other settings, so just the remaining settings really. Resolution notice, that'll just display a message on the screen to show you what resolution you're currently using. So if you are using a non-native resolution, it'll tell you. When you first turn the monitor on and you're using the native resolution, it'll also tell you that that's what you're using. If it changes into HDR, it'll also give you a little thing saying that it's running in HDR. There's also a little reminder there of whether HDR is active or not active. And I should mention, when you're running HDR, the menu system is exactly the same. You have full control over everything, or I think off the top of my head, everything. So I don't have to go through what you can and can't change there with HDR active, because you can change everything, which, as I mentioned in the review, is a little bit of a strange way of doing things. Auto switch, so that'll automatically select the input for you if you don't want to manually select it. Auto power off. This means if a signal is lost to the monitor, it'll automatically power down as if you've sort of used the power off function after this allotted amount of time, 10 minutes, 20 minutes or 30 minutes. LED indicator, so the little LED there, which I showed you before, you can have that off if you prefer. There's also friendly, and what this does is it'll be off when the monitor's on, but it will still go amber when the monitor's in a low power state. Whereas if you have it set to off, it won't even go amber when it's in a low power state. DisplayPort version, that's just a compatibility thing. 1.2 plus HDR means you have the full capability of the monitor. 1.2, the full capability of the monitor without HDR, or 1.1, you'll be sort of limited in terms of your capabilities. And it just depends if you've got an older system which doesn't support 1.2. I'd probably suggest you should consider a different monitor if that's the case, but it is there for compatibility purposes. Next, save settings. I did briefly mention this before. This is separate to the Custom 1, Custom 2 and Custom 3, but it saves absolutely everything to different sets of settings which you can quickly load or recall. And this will include changes you made to the color channels, because as I mentioned before, they are applied universally normally. So you can't have Custom 1 and Custom 2 having completely different RGB values. You can have them set to sort of warm or cool or one of the presets, but you can't customize the actual RGB levels. You'd have to use this save settings function for that instead. There's finally reset all, which resets everything to the factory default. I do not want to accidentally press that. So that's all there is to the OSD on-screen display menu system of the Gigabyte AORUS AD27QD. Be sure to check out the full review on PCmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do.